Every civilization has an origin. Rome has its legends, Greece has its heroes, Mesopotamia gave the world its first cities. But Egypt tells a different story. For more than 3,000 years, its kings ruled beneath an unchanging sun. They built monuments so vast that they still challenge modern engineers. They mastered writing, medicine, astronomy, and architecture while most of the ancient world was still finding its footing. At Egypt's greatest mystery isn't how the pyramids were built, it's how this extraordinary civilization began in the first place. Travel back thousands of years before the pharaohs, before the pyramids, before the hieroglyphs covered the temple walls, to a time when only a winding river cut through an endless wilderness. Because the rise of ancient Egypt didn't start with an empire. It started with a single river and the people who dared to build a civilization along its banks. Welcome to an unforgettable journey through the sands of time. Ancient Egypt. More than 8,000 years ago, the land we now call the Sahara Desert looked nothing like it does today. Instead of endless dunes, it was a rich and fertile world covered with vast grasslands, shimmering lakes, and flowing rivers. Herds of elephants, giraffes, antelopes, hippos, and wild cattle roamed freely across the landscape, while human communities hunted, fished, and gathered food in this thriving environment. For thousands of years, life flourished, but nature was about to change everything. Gradually, the climate became hotter and drier. The rain stopped, lakes disappeared, rivers dried up. Year after year, fertile grasslands transformed into barren desert. The once green Sahara slowly became the largest hot desert on earth. As the desert expanded, thousands of peoples were forced to abandon their homes. They migrated eastward towards a single source of life, the Nile River. Unlike the harsh desert surrounding it, the Nile flooded every year with remarkable regularity as the floodwaters retreated. They left behind a layer of rich black soil, perfect for growing wheat, barley, flax, fruits, and vegetables. The river provided fresh water, fish, fertile farmland, and easy route for travel and trade. For the people who settled along its banks, the Nile was far more than a river. It was a heartbeat of survival. Generation after generation, appeared along its fertile shores. Farmers learned to cultivate crops, fishermen mastered the waters, and families began building permanent homes. Without the Nile, ancient Egypt would never have existed. Over time, these small farming communities became more organized and prosperous. Cultures such as Badarian and the Nakada peoples emerged, producing beautifully crafted pottery, polished stone tools, carved ivory figurines, ceremonial palettes, and finely woven textiles. They traded valuable resources with neighboring regions, exchanging gold, copper, obsidian, and precious stones. Their beliefs also began to evolve. The dead were carefully buried with the food, pottery, jewelry, and personal possessions, reflecting an early belief that life continued beyond death, a belief that would later shape the magnificent pyramids, temples, and tombs of ancient Egypt. Although these peoples had no pharaohs, no pyramids, and no great cities, they had already laid the foundation of a civilization that would endure for more than 3,000 years. From these humble villages beside a life giving river, history was about to witness the rise of a kingdom unlike the world had ever seen. The first Egyptians. As the Nile became the center of life, more and more people gathered along its fertile banks. What began as scattered communities slowly grew into permanent villages, marking the beginning of Egypt's pre-dynastic period around 4400 BC. These early Egyptians were no longer constantly wandering in search of food. Instead, they built homes from mud and reeds, cultivated crops, domesticated cattle, sheep, and goats, and learned to live in harmony with the annual rhythm of Nile. For the first time, people had enough food to support larger communities, allowing new skills, ideas, and traditions to flourish. One of the earliest remarkable cultures was the Badarian culture, named after the village of El Badari in Upper Egypt. The Badarians were highly skilled craftsmen. They produced elegant black topped pottery, carved delicate ivory figurines, polished stone tools, and crafted beautiful ornaments from shells and semi precious stones. Their craftsmanship reveals a society that valued beauty as much as practicality. But perhaps their most remarkable achievement was their belief in life after death. When someone died, they were all carefully buried with food, pottery, jewelry, and personal belongings. These burials suggest that even thousands of years before the pyramids, Egyptians already believed that death was not the end of life's journey. Over centuries, the Badarian people were followed by the Nakada cultures, which transformed Egypt even further. Villages expanded into thriving towns. Skilled artisans experimented with new techniques, creating finely decorated pottery, ceremonial palettes, stone vessels, and magnificent flint knives. Among the most famous discoveries from this period is the Gebel el Arak knife, whose intricate carvings revealed astonishing artistic talent and early signs of organized leadership. Trade networks stretched far beyond the Nile Valley. Copper arrived from the Sinai Peninsula, cedar wood came from Levant, gold flowed from Nubia, and precious stones were exchanged across northeastern Africa. Egypt was no longer isolated. It was becoming the part of an ancient world connected by commerce and culture. As wealth increased, some settlements became larger and more powerful than others. Local leaders emerged controlling farmlands, trade routes, and growing population. Competition between neighboring communities intensified, but so did cooperation. Religious beliefs became more organized. Symbols of royal authority began to appear in artwork, and powerful chiefs established influence over wider regions. Without realizing it, these early societies were laying the foundations of the world's first great kingdom. The age of villages was coming to an end. The new era of kings, crowns, and conquest was about to begin. For centuries, the fertile Nile Valley was home to many settlements and powerful region kingdoms. As these communities prospered, two great regions emerged. In the south lay Upper Egypt, a narrow stretch of fertile land following Nile through steep cliffs and rocky valleys. Its rulers wore the white crown as symbol of their authority. Far to the north, where the Nile spread into vast delta before reaching the Mediterranean Sea, stood lower. Rich in fertile farmland and thriving trade routes, its kings wore the red crown. Though they shared the same river, language, and many religious beliefs, these two lands remained divided. Rival rulers competed for power, wealth, and control of the Nile, and conflict became increasingly common. But history was about to witness a turning point unlike any before. Around 3100 BC, a powerful ruler from the Upper Egypt began to campaign that would forever change the destiny of the Nile Valley. His name was Nama, remembered by many historians as the first pharaoh of an united Egypt. Leading a disciplined army, Nama defeated his rivals and brought Upper and Lower Egypt under a single ruler for the first time in history. To symbolize this extraordinary achievement, he wore the double crown, combining the white crown of Upper Egypt and the red crown of Lower Egypt into a royal emblem. The two kingdoms had become one nation. A new civilization had been born. One of the greatest pieces of evidence for this historic event is the Nama palette, discovered thousands of years later by archaeologists. Carved from the dark stone, the palette shows Nama wearing both crowns of Egypt on one side, he showing striking down an enemy with a raised mace, symbolizing his victory over rival kingdoms. On the other, he appears wearing the red crown, inspecting defeated enemies and celebrating the unification of the land. More than a work of art, the Nama palette served as a powerful political message. It declared that Egypt was no longer a collection of competing kingdoms, it was a single united state under one king. Following the unification, Nama established a strong central government, bringing order to the Nile Valley. Officials were appointed to collect taxes, oversee agriculture, manage irrigation, and maintain law and order. Trade expanded, cities grew larger, and resources from across the kingdom flowed to the royal court. Near the point where the upper and lower Egypt meet, a new royal capital was established, Memphis. Perfectly positioned between the two regions, it became the political and administrative heart of the kingdom. For the first time, Egypt possessed the stability needed to achieve extraordinary things. Over the centuries that followed, this united kingdom would build magnificent temples, develop writing, create one of the world's most sophisticated governments, and eventually rise the colossal pyramids that still inspire today. The age of pharaohs had begun. With Egypt now unified under a single crown, Nama's successors inherited both a powerful kingdom and a profound responsibility. This marked the beginning of the first dynasty, the earliest line of pharaohs to rule an unified Egypt. Their focus was no longer conquest but stability and governance. To maintain control over a land stretching thousands of miles along the Nile, strong leadership and careful administration was essential. The pharaoh was not merely a king, he was regarded as a divine ruler entrusted with preserving order in both the human and natural worlds. The early pharaohs strengthened Nama's system of government, expanding it into a more structured and centralized administration. Local governors were appointed to oversee distant regions, ensure that royal decrees were implemented consistently across the kingdom. Taxes were collected in the form of grain and goods stored in royal granaries and redistributed during the period of scarcity. This system enabled Egypt to withstand floods, droughts, and shortages, transforming the unpredictability of the Nile into the foundation of resilient economy. For the first time, a single authority regulated the rhythm of life along the river. As the kingdom expanded, so did the need for effective communication and record keeping. This led to one of the Egypt's most significant innovations, hieroglyphic writing. Scribes documented taxes, laws, religious rituals, and royal decrees on stones and papyrus. Writing became an essential instrument of governance, extending the pharaoh's authority across the entire land. The who mastered this skill held considerable influence, forming a respected class of educated officials who served the state. The early pharaohs also began constructing elaborate burial structures to secure their journey into the afterlife. Initially, these took the form of simple mud brick structure known as mastabas, flat roof tombs designed to protect the bodies and possessions of the deceased. Within them, rulers were interred with food, jewelry, tools, and treasures believed to be essential for the next world. These tombs reflected a growing conviction that the pharaoh's authority did not end with death, it endured eternal. By the end of the first dynasty, Egypt had evolved from a newly unified territory into a highly organized and enduring civilization. Government, religion, writing, and architecture were all beginning to take shape in ways that would define Egypt for millennia. The pharaohs were no longer simply unifiers, they were architects of an eternal state. And as the Nile continued its time flow, so too did the legacy of Egypt's first kings. By around 2686 BC, Egypt had entered a new era of peace, stability, and prosperity known today as Old Kingdom. For nearly 5 centuries, powerful pharaohs ruled a united land from their capital at Memphis, strengthening the government, expanding agriculture, and overseeing one of the most remarkable periods of construction in human history. To the Egyptian people, the pharaoh was far more than a king. He was believed to be the living representative of gods on earth, responsible for maintaining Maat, the sacred balance of order, justice, and harmony that governed both the nature and society. As long as the pharaoh upheld Maat, the Nile would flood, crops would grow, and Egypt would prosper. Around 2670 BC, a visionary leader named Pharaoh Zoser changed architecture forever. Instead of building a traditional mud brick, royal Tom Dozer commissioned his brilliant architect Imhotep to create something the world had never seen before. Stone upon stone, 6 massive platforms were stacked together, forming the world's first monumental stone building, the Step Pyramid of Saqqara. Standing high above the desert, it became a symbol of royal power, engineering genius, and humanity's first great leap into monumental architecture. Imhotep's revolutionary design would inspire every pyramid that followed, Several generations later, Egypt reached the peak of its architectural achievement. During the reign of Pharaoh Khufu, thousands of skilled workers, engineers, architects, and craftsmen gathered on the Giza plateau. Contrary to people's myth, these were not slaves but organized laborers who lived in nearby workers' village, receiving food, medical care, and wages for their work. Using copper tools, wooden sledges, ropes, and remarkable engineering knowledge, they transported and carefully placed millions of limestone blocks. After years of extraordinary effort, the Great Pyramid of Giza rose towards the heavens, becoming the talent human made structure on earth for nearly thousands of years. Nearby, the pyramids of Khafre and Menkaure soon captured one of the greatest architectural landscapes ever created. The whole kingdom was far more than an age of pyramids. Across Egypt, magnificent temples were constructed, priests performed daily rituals, scribes carefully recorded taxes and harvests, merchants traded along the Nile, and farmers cultivated fertile lands enriched by the river's annual floods. Artists decorated tombs with colorful paintings depicting farming, fishing, hunting, festivals, and family life. These scenes reflected the Egyptian belief that everything needed in life should accompany the dead into eternity. For the Egyptians, death was not ending, it was the beginning of another journey. Their pyramids, temples, and tombs were built not simply to honor kings, but to prepare them for everlasting life among the gods. As the old kingdom reached its height, Egypt stood as one of the richest, most powerful, and most technologically advanced civilizations on earth. Yet even the greatest kingdoms cannot remain unchanged forever. For centuries, the old kingdom had stood as a symbol of power and stability. But even the greatest civilizations are not immune to decline. Around 2181 BC, Egypt entered one of the darkest chapters in its history. The immense cost of building pyramids, the growing independence of powerful provincial governors known as nomarchs, and a series of poor Nile floods weakened the authority of pharaohs. As harvests failed, famine spread across the land, trade declined, and the once powerful central government collapsed. Egypt fragmented into rival kingdoms, each ruled by local leaders competing for power. This turbulent era became known as the First Intermediate Period. Without a strong pharaoh to unite the country, conflict became common. Cities struggled for resources, land order deteriorated, and ordinary people faced uncertainty. Yet, despite political chaos, Egyptian culture endured. Local rulers continued building temples and tombs. Artisans preserved their skills, and scribes kept alive the traditions of writing, religion, and administration. The civilization bent under pressure but did not break. Around 2055 BC, hope returned. A powerful river ruler from Thebes, Mentuhotep II, defeated his rivals and reunited the Upper and Lower Egypt. Bringing an end to more than a century of division, his victory marked the beginning of Middle Kingdom. Often regarded as Egypt's classical age, the royal court was moved to strengthen control over the kingdom, government was reorganized, and confidence slowly returned to the people. The pharaohs of the Middle Kingdom focused not only on monuments but also on improving the lives of their subjects. Massive irrigation projects expanded farmland, canals controlled the Nile's waters more effectively, and trade routes reached deep into Nubia, the Levant, and the land of Punt, bringing gold, ivory, incense, ebony, and other valuable goods into Egypt. Literature, pottery, sculpture, and architecture flourished once again, reflecting a renewed sense of national identity and cultural achievement. Egypt had emerged stronger from crisis than anyone could have imagined, but beyond its eastern borders, new groups of foreign people were slowly moving towards the Nile Delta. Their arrival would rush in another dramatic chapter in Egyptian history, challenging the kingdom in ways it had never experienced before. For nearly 4 centuries, the Middle Kingdom brought Egypt peace, prosperity, and renewed strength. But around 1615 BC, a new threat emerged from the northeast. A group of foreign rulers known as Hyksos gradually settled in the fertile Nile Delta. Rather than launching a simple massive invasion, they entered Egypt over time, eventually seizing control of the northern region and establishing their capital at Avaris. The Hyksos possessed military technologies that were unfamiliar to the Egyptians. They introduced the horse drawn chariots, the powerful composite bow, improved bronze weapons, stronger armor, and new methods of warfare. Against these innovations, the armies of Egypt were unprepared. Northern Egypt fell under Hyksos rule, while native Egyptians continued to govern only the south from Thebes. For the first time in centuries, Egypt was divided and ruled in part by foreign kings. Although remembered as conquerors, these Hyksos also influenced Egyptian society. They expanded trade with the neighboring regions, introduced new crops and technologies, and strengthened connections with the wider ancient world. Yet many Egyptians longed to reclaim their homeland. In Thebes, a new generation of rulers refused to accept the foreign domination and began preparing for war. The struggle after liberation began under Sequenenra Tao, who challenged the Hyksos despite overwhelming odds. His campaign was continued by his son Chamos, who pushed northward against the occupiers and weakened their control. Finally, around 1550 BC, Chamos' brother Ahmose I launched the decisive campaign, leading a disciplined Egyptian army equipped with the very chariots and weapons once used against them. Amos captured Avaris and drove the Hyksos out of Egypt, pursuing them into southern Canaan to ensure they could never threaten Egypt again. Amos' victory transformed Egypt forever. Determined never to be conquered again, he recognized and reorganized the military into a highly trained professional force and strengthened the kingdom's borders. This triumph marked the beginning of new kingdom, the greatest and the most powerful era in Egyptian history. Egypt was no longer simple a kingdom protected by the Nile. It had become an empire ready to expand beyond its frontiers. The pharaohs who followed would build magnificent temples, conquer distant lands, accumulate immense wealth, and rule over an empire stretching from Nubia in the south to Syria in the north. The age of legendary rulers had begun. The expulsion of Hyksos marked the beginning of new chapter in Egyptian history. Around 1550 BC, Amos I founded the new kingdom, an era that would become the greatest age of power, wealth, and cultural achievement in ancient Egypt. Having learned the dangers of isolation, Egypt transformed into an military empire. Professional armies protected its borders, while victorious campaigns expanded Egyptians' influence deep into Nubia, the Levant, and the parts of Syria. Tribute in the form of gold, ivory, incense, cedar wood, exotic animals, and precious stones followed into Egypt, making it one of the richest civilizations of the ancient world. One of the most extraordinary rulers of this period was Hatshepsut, one of the first and few women to rule as pharaoh. Rather than focusing on conquest, she strengthened Egypt through the trade and diplomacy. Her famous expedition to the land of Punt brought back incense trees, ebony, ivory, gold, and rare animals. She also commissioned magnificent monuments, including her breathtaking mortuary temple at Deir el Bahri, a masterpiece of ancient architecture nested beneath towering cliffs. After Hatshepsut came Thutmose III, often called the Napoleon of ancient Egypt. A brilliant military strategist, he led numerous successful campaigns into Syria and Canaan, defeating rival kingdoms and creating the largest empire Egypt had ever known. His victories secured important trade routes, increased Egypt's wealth, and established the new kingdom as dominant power of an ancient Near East. As Egypt's empire expanded, so did its monuments. The pharaohs launched ambitious buildings projects unlike anything seen before. Massive temples rose at Karnak, Luxor, and across the Nile Valley. Giant obelisks, towering statues, and intricately carved halls celebrated both the gods and the achievements of the kings. The worship of Ammon reached its height, and the temples of Karnak grew into the largest religious complex ever constructed in ancient Egypt. The new kingdom was not only an age of military triumph and the monumental architecture, it was also the time of artistic excellence, scientific knowledge, and cultural prosperity. Skilled craftsmen created exquisite jewelry, elegant sculptures, colorful wall paintings, and richly decorated tombs. Scribes recorded history, literature flourished, and Egyptian influence spread far beyond the Nile, inspiring neighboring civilizations. By the height of the new kingdom, Egypt stood at the peak of its power. Its armies were feared, its temples astonished the world, and its pharaohs were revered as living gods. Yet beneath this golden age, new religious ideas and political ambitions were beginning to challenge centuries of traditions. At the height of New Kingdom, Egypt was the richest and the most powerful civilization in the ancient world. Magnificent temples rose across the Nile Valley and the worship of Amun dominated religious life. But around 1353 BC, everything changed. When Amenhotep IV ascended the throne, soon after becoming pharaoh, he abandoned centuries of tradition and renamed himself Akhenaten, means effective for Aten. He declared that the Aten, represented by the sun's radiant disk, was the supreme deity of Egypt. Temples dedicated to Amun and many other gods were closed, their wealth confiscated, and traditional religious ceremonies were suppressed. To distance himself from the old priesthood, Akhetaten founded a completely new capital called Akhetaten, known today as Amarna. This religious revolution transformed Egyptian art as well. Sculptures and paintings became more naturalistic, showing the royal family in intimate family scenes beneath the rays of Aten. This distinctive style, now known as Amarna art, broke dramatically from centuries of rigid artistic tradition. Yet while Akhenaten devoted himself to religious reform, Egypt's influence abroad weakened as rival powers challenged its control over distant territories. After Akhenaten's death, his revolution quickly began to unravel. His young successor, Tutankhaten, restored the ancient gods, changed his name to Tutankhamun, and returned to the royal court to its traditional centers. The temples of Amun reopened, priests resumed their sacred rituals, and the old religious order was re established. Later rulers, including Ea and Horemheb, erased many traces of Akhenaten's reign, dismantling the monuments and removing his name from official records in an effort to restore stability. Around 1279 BC, another extraordinary ruler ascended the throne, Ramesses II. Remembered as the Ramesses the Great during his remarkable reign of more than 60 years, Egypt reached another peak of power and prosperity. Ramesses launched ambitious building projects across the kingdom, expanding the temples of Karnak and Luxor, constructing his magnificent rock-cut temples at Abu Simbel, and exerting obelisks that proclaimed his greatness throughout the empire. Ramesses II was also one of the Egypt's greatest military commanders. He led his army against the Hittite Empire in the famous Battle of Kadesh, one of the largest chariot battles in history. Although neither side of the achieved a decisive victory, the conflict ended with the signing of world's earliest known surviving peace treaty, establishing peace between two of the ancient world's greatest powers. Under Ramesses the Great, Egypt displayed its wealth, military strength, and architectural brilliance to the world. Yet beyond Egypt's borders, new enemies were gathering. Powerful groups known as the Sea People, along with growing internal challenges, would soon test the strength of the empire and bring the glorious age of New Kingdom towards its final chapter. The decline of New Kingdom and the Third Intermediate Period. For centuries, the New Kingdoms had stood as the greatest empire of ancient world. Its armies had conquered distant lands, its temples towered above the Nile, and its pharaohs were revered as living gods. But by the late 13th century BC, the foundations of this mighty civilization was beginning to weaken. Egypt's immense wealth attracted powerful enemies from every direction to the west. Libyan tribes repeatedly crossed the desert frontier in search of fertile land across the Mediterranean. Mysterious maritime warriors known as the Sea Peoples launched devastating attacks against the great civilizations of the Bronze Age. Entire kingdoms collapsed under these assaults, and Egypt itself faced one of the greatest military threats in its history. The Egyptian army fought fiercely to defend the kingdom. During the reign of Ramesses III, massive land and naval battles were fought in the Nile Delta. Egyptian archers, infantry, and warships successfully defeated invading sea peoples, preserving Egypt's independence. Although the kingdom survived, the victory came at an enormous cost. Years of warfare drained the royal treasures, weakened the economy, and exhausted the military. At the same time, Egypt's vast empire overseas began to crumble. One by one, its territories in Canaan, Syria, and Nubia slipped from Egyptian control. Trade routes that had once brought gold, cedar, ivory, and luxurious goods into the kingdom declined, reducing the wealth that had sustained the empire for generations. Within Egypt, corruption spread through the government. Officials abused their power, and even the royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings became targets for thieves for searching precious treasures. As the authority of the pharaohs weakened and the powerful force emerged, the high priests of Amun at Thebes accumulated enormous wealth, vast estates, and growing political influence. Before long, they controlled much of the Upper Egypt, while pharaohs ruled mainly from the north. Egypt was once again divided between competing centers of power. Around 1069 BC, the glorious new kingdom came to an end, ushering in the third intermediate period. Instead of one united kingdom, Egypt was ruled by rival dynasties, regional kings, and powerful priesthoods. Although political unity had fractured, Egyptian civilization endured, temples continued to function, artists preserved ancient traditions, scripts maintained sacred knowledge, and the people remained deeply devoted to their gods and customs. The age of mighty empire had passed, but Egypt's story was far from over. In the centuries ahead, new rulers from Libya, Nubia, Assyria, and eventually Persia would leave their mark on the land of pharaohs. Despite repeated invasions and changing dynasties, the civilization of ancient Egypt continued to survive, adapting to every challenge while preserving a cultural legacy unlike any other in history. After the collapse of New Kingdom, Egypt entered a long period of political fragmentation known as the Third Intermediate Period. Once the center of the world's greatest empires, the land of pharaohs was not divided among rival dynasties, powerful priests, and the regional rulers. This internal weakness made Egypt increasingly vulnerable to ambitious foreign powers eager to control its wealth and strategic location. The first of these new rulers came from the west, Libyan chiefs, whose ancestors had lived along Egypt's western frontier for generations gradually rose to power. Around 943 BC, Soshenk I founded the 22nd dynasty, becoming pharaoh, and reunited much of the country. Although of the Libyan origin, these rulers embraced Egyptian tradition, worshipped the ancient gods, restored temples, and ruled as legitimate pharaohs rather than foreign conquerors. Their reign demonstrated the remarkable ability of Egyptian civilization to absorb new peoples without losing its cultural identity. Several centuries later, another powerful kingdom emerged from the south. The rulers of Nubia, based in the kingdom of Kush, deeply admired Egyptian religions, languages, and royal customs. Around 728 BC, King Pa marched north from Nubia and reunited Egypt under Kushite rule. Establishing the 25th dynasty, the Nubian pharaohs restored neglected temples, received ancient religious traditions, and launched ambitious building projects throughout the Nile Valley. They saw themselves not as outsiders but as true heirs of the legacy of ancient pharaohs. However, Egypt's growing strength soon attracted the attention of expanding Assyrian Empire, the most formidable military power of its age, armed with disciplined infantry, powerful siege engines, and iron weapons. The Assyrians invaded Egypt in the 7th century BC. After fierce campaigns, they captured Memphis and later Thebes, forcing the Kushite rulers to retreat south into Nubia. For the first time, Egypt had fallen under the domination of vast Near Eastern Empire. Although the Assyrian occupation was relatively brief, another foreign empire soon arrived. In 525 BC, the Persian king Cambyses II defeated Pharaoh Psamtik III at the Battle of Pelusium, bringing Egypt under the rule of mighty Achaemenid Persian Empire. Egypt became one of the Persia's richest provinces, contributing grain, gold, and taxes to the empire. While Persian rulers repeated many Egyptian customs and adopted the title of pharaoh, periodic revolts revealed that the Egyptian people never abandoned their desire for independence. For centuries, Egypt had survived political collapse, foreign invasions, and changing dynasties. Each new ruler left a lasting influence, yet the civilization itself endured. Its temples remained active, its priests preserved sacred traditions, and the timeless rhythm of Nile continued to sustain the people. But an ever greater transformation was approaching, one that would write the cultures of Egypt and Greece under the extraordinary conqueror, Alexander the Great. In 332 BC, the ancient world witnessed the arrival of one of the history's greatest conquerors, Alexander the Great. The young king of Macedon marched into Egypt after defeating the Persian Empire. Unlike previous invaders, Alexander was welcomed by the Egyptians as liberator. After centuries of foreign domination, they saw him as rightful pharaoh who had freed their land from Persian rule. During his belief stay in Egypt, Alexander made a decision that would shape history for centuries. On the Mediterranean coast, he founded a magnificent new city, Alexandria, carefully planned with broad avenues, grand palaces, busy harbors, and impressive public buildings. Alexandria soon became one of the greatest cities of ancient world. It would grow into a center of commerce, science, philosophy, and culture, connecting Egypt with Greece, Africa, Asia, and the wider Mediterranean world. Alexander also traveled deep into the western desert to the famous oracle of Amun at the Siva oasis. There, the priests proclaimed him the son of the god Amun, strengthening his claim to rule as pharaoh. But Alexander's time in Egypt was short. In 332 BC, he died unexpectedly in Babylon at the age of just 32, leaving behind an empire without a clear successor. Following Alexander's death, one of his most trusted generals, Ptolemy Isoter, took control of Egypt and established the Ptolemaic dynasty, which would rule the country for nearly 3 centuries. Although the Ptolemies were of Macedonian Greek origin, they adopted the title of pharaoh, supported Egyptian temples, honored traditional gods, and blended Greek and Egyptian cultures into an unique civilization unlike any seen before. Under Ptolemies, Alexandria became the intellectual capital of ancient world. Its legendary libraries of Alexandria collected hundreds and thousands of scrolls from across the known world, while the museum, a great center of learning, attracted the brilliant scholars, mathematicians, astronomers, physicians, and philosophers. Towering above the city's harbor stood the magnificent lighthouse of Pharaohs, one of the seven wonders of ancient world, guiding ships safely across the Mediterranean Sea. The last and the most famous ruler of Ptolemaic dynasty was Cleopatra VII, intelligent, charismatic, and highly educated. Cleopatra spoke in several languages and sought to restore Egypt's independence as a growing power of Rome threatened her kingdom. Through political alliances with Julius Caesar and later Mark Antony, she fought to preserve Egypt's sovereignty. But after their defeat by Octavian at the Battle of Actium in 31 BC, Egypt's fate was sealed. In 30 BC, following the deaths of Antony and Cleopatra, Egypt became a province of the Roman Empire. The 3000-year age of pharaohs had come to an end. At the civilization they created, the pyramids, temples, hieroglyphs, art, science, religion, and engineering would survive long after their kingdom has disappeared, inspiring generations across the world. Rediscovering ancient Egypt. the Rosetta Stone, and the secrets of the Pharaohs. For nearly 15 centuries, after the fall of Cleopatra, the civilization of ancient Egypt slowly faded into legend. The magnificent temples stood abandoned, the pyramids watched silently over the deserts, and the mysterious hieroglyphs that once recorded the triumphs of pharaohs became an unreadable language. The knowledge of ancient Egypt seemed lost forever, buried beneath drifting sands and the passage of time. Every changed in 1798 when Napoleon Bonaparte led his famous expeditions to Egypt. Although the campaign was primarily military, it also included dozens of engineers, artists, architects, and scholars who carefully documented Egypt's ancient monuments. Their work sparked a wave of fascination with Egyptian civilization across Europe and laid the foundation for modern Egyptology. The greatest breakthrough came the following year in 1799. French soldiers repaired a fort near the town of Rosetta discovered an unusual black granodiorite slab. It contained the same royal decree written in three different scripts: ancient Greek, Demotic, and Egyptian hieroglyphs. This remarkable artifact became known as the Rosetta Stone, offering the first real hope of unlocking a language that had remained silent for nearly 1500 years. For more than 2 decades, scholars across Europe struggled to decipher its mysterious symbols. Then in 1822, the French linguist Jean-Francois Champlain achieved what many believed was impossible. By comparing the Greek text with the hieroglyphs and recognizing that many symbols represented sounds as well as ideas, he successfully deciphered the ancient Egyptian written system. For the first time since the Roman era, the voices of pharaohs could once again be read. The Champlain's discovery transformed our understanding of ancient Egypt. Temple walls, royal decrees, religious texts, and tomb inscriptions suddenly came to life. Historians could now read the names of kings, understand religions, beliefs, reconstruct historical events, and uncover details of everyday life that had remained hidden for centuries. Ancient Egypt was no longer a civilization of myths. It became one of the best documented civilizations of ancient world. The decades that followed witnessed extraordinary archaeological discoveries. Explorers uncovered magnificent temples buried beneath sand, entered richly decorated tombs in the valleys of kings, and revealed the masterpieces of art and engineering. The discovery of Tutankhamun's nearly intact tomb in 1922 amazed the world, revealing dazzling treasures of gold, jewelry, furniture, weapons, and ceremonial objects that had remained untouched for over 3,000 years. Today, the pyramids of Giza, the temples of Karnak, Luxor, Abu Simbel, and countless other monuments continue to stand as enduring symbols of one of the humanity's greatest civilizations. Through archaeology, science, and decipherment of hieroglyphs, the voices of ancient Egypt speak once again, allowing us to understand a civilization that shaped the course of human history. The lasting legacy of ancient Egypt, although the age of pharaohs ended more than 2000 years ago, the influence of ancient Egypt never truly disappeared. Its achievements continue to shape civilizations across the Mediterranean and beyond, leaving a legacy that can still seen in the modern world. The Egyptians were among the first people to build a highly organized state with a centralized government, professional administrators, and an effective, efficient system of taxation and record keeping. Their innovations in engineering allowed them to construct monumental temples, pyramids, obelisks, and statues with astonishing precision, many of which still stand today as symbols of human ingenuity and determination. Ancient Egyptian knowledge extended far beyond architecture. Their understanding of mathematics helped survey land after the Nile's annual floods and guided the construction of massive monuments. Their observations of stars led to one of the world's earliest 365-day solar calendars, influencing later Greek and Roman calendars and eventually the calendar system used today. Egyptian physicians recorded treatments for wounds, broken bones, and illness, laying important foundations for the development of medicine. The invention of papyrus, made from the needs of Nile, revolutionized writing and communication throughout the ancient world. Scribes preserved literature, religious texts, legal documents, scientific knowledge, and historical records, allowing ideas to survive for generations. Their system of hieroglyph writing, once forgotten, was eventually deciphered through the Rosetta Stone, opening a remarkable window into one of the humanity's oldest civilizations. Egyptian religion, art, and architecture also inspired neighboring cultures. Greek scholars traveled to Egypt to study its knowledge. Roman emperors admired and preserved many of its temples, and countless monuments become symbols of wisdom, power, and eternity. Even today, the pyramids, the Great Sphinx, Karnak, Luxor, Abu Simbel, and the Valley of the Kings attract millions of visitors from around the world every year. Modern archaeology continues to uncover new tombs, temples, statues, papyrus scrolls, and ancient settlements hidden beneath the desert sand. Every discovery deepens our understanding of how the Egyptians lived, worked, worshipped, and built one of the history's most remarkable civilizations. Even after centuries of exploration, many secrets remain blurred, waiting to be revealed. Ancient Egypt reminds us that the great civilizations are built through innovations, cooperation, and vision. Its achievements continue to inspire architects, engineers, historians, scientists, artists, and explorers across the globe. The civilization born beside the Nile more than 5,000 years ago remains one of the humanity's greatest achievements, a timeless reminder that past still shapes our future. Our journey through the ancient Egypt had taken us across more than 5,000 years of history, from the first farming communities along the Nile to the rise of mighty pharaohs, the construction of pyramids, the glory of new kingdoms, and the final reign of Cleopatra. Few civilizations has left such an extraordinary mark on the story of humanity. Even after the last pharaoh disappeared, Egypt's influence never faded. The Greeks admired its wisdom, the Romans preserved many of its temples, and centuries later, archaeologists uncovered treasures that revealed the remarkable achievements of its people. The decipherment of hieroglyphs through the Rosetta Stone allowed the voices of ancient kings, priests, scribes, and ordinary Egyptians to speak to us once again. After remaining silent for nearly 15 centuries, today the Great Pyramid of Giza still stands as the last surviving wonder of ancient world. The temples of Karnak, Luxor, Abu Simbel, Edfu, and the Valley of the Kings continue to amaze millions of visitors every year. Every new archaeological discovery reminds us that the ancient Egypt still holds countless secrets beneath its sands, waiting to reshape our understanding of the past. But perhaps Egypt's greatest legacy is not its monuments, it is its message. It teaches us that human curiosity, imagination, cooperation, and determination can create achievements that endure for thousands of years. From humble villages along the Nile to one of the greatest civilizations ever known, ancient Egypt proved that the dreams of one generation can inspire countless generations that follow. As we conclude this documentary, remember that history is not merely a record of past. It is the story of humanity itself, a story that continues to shape our present and guide our future. Ancient Egypt may have vanished as a kingdom, but its spirit lives in every pyramid that touches the sky, every hieroglyph carved into stone, and every discovery that brings us closer to understanding our shared human journey. Thank you for joining me on this incredible exploration of ancient Egypt. If you enjoyed this documentary, please like, subscribe, and share this video so that more people can discover the fascinating history of one of the world's greatest civilizations. Until our next journey into the past, thank you for watching and remember, history is never truly forgotten. Thank you.